This is a presentation I gave at GusDay 2023 at St. Olaf College in Northfield, Minnesota. How to lead and be led by a team of student developers. I'm Chad Kluck. I'm a software engineer at the University of St. Thomas in the Innovation and Technology Services. The resources for this presentation, as well as a downloadable PowerPoint and PDF of this presentation, are available on my website at chadkluck.net/GusDay-2023. The University of St. Thomas is a private institution here in Minnesota. We have 8 schools and colleges. We have an enrollment of about 9,000 undergraduate and graduate students, and we have campuses in St. Paul, Minneapolis, and Rome. I'm a full-stack cloud software engineer. I have a Master of Science in Software Engineering, and I have 4 years experience as a student employee, and I have 20 years experience being on staff. 13 years of that was spent in the Career Development Center, where over that 13 years I managed 7 students, all in social media. I spent 8 years in Library Digital Services, in which over that time I managed 9 students. That was a total of 5 marketing students and 4 developer students, so I managed both marketing as well as developer students. And at the time of the presentation, this is my 8th week in ITS, so I moved from the library into ITS. So as I transition from the libraries to ITS, my needs, of course, are going to be different, just like your needs are going to be different. So what I'm going to present today are my experiences working within the library, working within their systems, and leading a team of developers there in the library. So what I would recommend is that as you look at this, don't get into the technical details or the small details, but think of ways to adapt this to meet your needs. Each organization, each campus, each body of students is going to be a little different. So does this describe your experience? When you're talking about or thinking about managing student employees, are you just thinking about how it's going to be when you supervise? What about training, provisioning access? We all know about provisioning access. You have to make a request. That request, could get stuck somewhere. Maybe it takes a week to fulfill. Then your student is given access, but maybe it's not the right access. Troubleshooting. Troubleshooting workstations, troubleshooting access, troubleshooting just pretty much anything that could definitely go wrong. Creating documentation, that's always something that gets out of date. How do you keep that up to date? Setting up workstations. Maybe you have a whole bunch of workstations. Maybe you have like 2 or 3 students, but yet they rotate between workstations depending upon what's available. Maybe sometimes they're using a traditionally staff workstation, and sometimes it's there's a staff member there and they got to move to a different workstation. For developers, that's definitely tricky because you have to set up a development environment, and how do you get that created across the board so that it's consistent and so that you can get consistent results. Incurring technical debt. You have a student graduate, they finish a project, they graduate, and then all of a sudden the project is handed off to you. It may be maybe it worked on a local development environment, but it's not working on your local development environment, or it's not working when you put it into production. So that's always an issue. So then you're now maintaining and trying to get this project to work in production. Also, maybe it was a different programming language or a different platform or a different framework that was used, and now you need to maintain it a year or 2 later, and then all of a sudden you're just not sure how to go about that, or a different version of a framework was used. So now you've got technical debt. And then of course there's hiring. How do you hire the right students? What if you hire a student, you train them, you go through all this process, but then they leave after the semester or mid-semester or after a year? Or they've been around for 3 years and they graduate. How do you go through that hiring process so that you can keep getting those students who can do your projects? And the cycle just keeps going and going and going. And you're doing all of this instead of getting work done. So it took me a few years, but I rethought the student experience, and it really is a student experience. We're working at a university or a college, and the students are there, they're learning, they're in computer science, they're there for the learning experience. So how was it that I could provide them a learning environment? How was it that I could learn from them? How was it that we could have projects that were able to get completed and be able to be maintained and hire in new students year after year? So as I rethought it, I came up with these 6 areas. First, I focused and I scoped the position. And I did that by leaving room for growth. Basically, I created a baseline. What was the baseline skills that were needed in order to perform just basic level tasks? And once I was able to figure that out, I was able to then build upon it, as they advance. So that's leaving room for growth, letting them starting at the position and then leaving them room so that they could then learn more as they go on. And then, of course, hiring the right students. You want to hire students who can come in, start a project, and evolve. And so then you need to know what you need from them. And then providing structure. So that goes to schedules, communication, and expectations. You got to have those right out the bat. Day one, students need to know what their expectations are. Pretty much any employee needs to know what their schedule, what their communication, and what other expectations are. Otherwise, they're trying to figure it out, and they don't know exactly what it is that they're supposed to be doing. And then competencies for advancement with pay increases. So as I focused and I scoped the position and I kind of like built layers upon it, I didn't expect the students to have all those layers or to advance all those layers quickly. I expect that it would be a year or two or several semesters that they'd be able to advance. And with each advancement, there would be a pay increase. And then development guidelines. I gave them guardrails. I gave them a list of programming languages and technologies that we were using, and to just stay within that. So if we were developing on Node.js, they weren't going off and creating Rust projects or anything like that. They were staying within the knowledge base that we currently had that we were able to support. And then learning opportunities for them as well as me. So that's new projects, giving them the ability to, if we don't have testing for a certain project, letting them go out, learn how to write unit tests, come back and implement them. And not just implement them, but also document and create training materials. That way both I and future students could come back, see what was being done, and create additional tests. So there's basically a cycle in terms of like once the project is done, making sure that it's not done until there's documentation and tests created. That way it can be replicated semester after semester. Focus and scope the position. Don't do a brain dump. They don't need to know everything, and they need to survive their first day. You want to give them a reason to come back and explore. So there's been a few times where either I, as a staff member, or as a student, or I've seen other students in which the first day is just a brain dump. You go through all the systems, you try to provide access to everything. That way, they have access to every single possible project that could come down the line. I got rid of that. I basically, when I scoped the position, I figured out what it was that they needed to know right from the start, which I'll get into this later, but it's basic JavaScript, CSS, and HTML. And those were the projects that I gave them. I didn't give them anything that dealt with a Java framework. I didn't give them anything that dealt with backend development. I basically scoped them down so they only did a specific set of tasks. So with that, I was able to kind of think of it more of as a curriculum. I had that baseline. Once they mastered that and they felt comfortable, then I added more onto it. That's when I brought them into another system or another set of skills, and I was able to teach them that. And so then they were building upon each set of skills that they learned. And I made sure that the projects reflected that. That if I had this massive project come down the line that I really did need help with, but I didn't have any student developers who were at that level yet, I had to manage that myself. I was not going to like quickly accelerate what the students were doing. I thought of it really as a curriculum, bringing them up through, levels of knowledge and building upon it. And then, of course, I wanted to give them an exciting first-time project. It wasn't something that I just wanted them to have me giving them a project and then just like me explaining how it's done. I wanted to give them projects that they were able to go do research on, figure it out themselves, come back, teach me, and then make sure that we could replicate it in the future as well. Again, I go back to the example of unit testing or just general tests. That's something that, a lot of us, we don't have a lot of time for. So that's also something that, at least in the curriculum at St. Thomas, a lot of students already have that experience in class, creating unit tests and other tests. So it was something that they could learn, or that they could bring from their class into the work environment and make the work environment better for it. So when I talk about focusing and scoping the position, here's just a sample list. This isn't an exhaustive list, it's just a small list. And being a small list, it's still pretty large. If you were to look at this list and divide it up amongst the 14 weeks that you have students during a semester, this is a list of about 10 items. Divide them amongst 14 weeks. You're having them progress pretty quickly. So this is so much to do in one semester. So what I did was I took this list, which includes like WordPress CMS, University CMS, which is written in a different language, access to the university portal, which is written in another language. Maybe there's a department subsite. Maybe there's static assets that we have, that are used on multiple sites. Performing website updates. Maybe we have microsites as well, written in yet another framework. And there's API development in cloud and serverless, and then we have tests. So that's a long list to try to teach a student and have them excel at quickly. So I sat down and I organized that list to figure out a learning path, basically. So this is where the curriculum comes in. I'm developing a learning path, starting out with static assets, JavaScript and CSS, and as well as HTML. That is like the core baseline. I'm going to say it again. That is my baseline. Once they have a good understanding of good JavaScript, CSS, and HTML scripting and coding, then I feel like they're ready to start writing tests. So this is where, if tests are new for your department, it's something that the students can go do research on, come back, and implement it. So it's a fun project for them to do. And then once they kind of start doing that, then they can build on, and they can maybe maintain existing microsites or some frameworks that you might have. Something that's already developed that they can see how it's already been developed. Hopefully it's already like a good structure. If it's not a good structure, it's also a project that they can like go do some research as to best practices and then update the existing site to make sure that it does conform to good structure. So again, another project for them, and it's a learning. They can go and research best practices. And that's a key to a lot of my projects that I give them. I always say, go research best practices before you start. I might not have the best practices documented, so it's great for them to go, and it also puts it on them. It's not up to me to document and train. They can go, they can do the research, because they're more than capable of doing it. And then maintaining the existing university CMS, maybe writing a few view components that they write and then I take and fit it into the CMS. This also makes sure that there's enough for them to do, that it can take stuff off my plate, and then I can like handle the bigger projects, or if I have other advanced students, I can give that to them, and I'm not forcing a whole bunch of new stuff onto a entry-level student. Also, in terms of website updates, I don't really have my developer students do that. I gave that to the social media students. Hiring the right students. What you need to do is you need to set the expectations for candidates as well as you. So you need to screen your candidates, of course. Once you come up with a focus, compare the job description that you laid out with the resumes. And if you want developers, you need to hire development experience. That's just key. When I was hiring developers, I made sure that they did that they had a course or a job or a personal project that they did that dealt with JavaScript, HTML, or CSS, or some flavor of it. That way, I knew that they were serious about developing, and if I was putting that in the job description and they had that experience, hopefully they were presenting that. Hopefully they were presenting that in their resume. I did get several candidates where, even though it was in the job description, and I'll show you pieces of the job description here in a moment, I received resumes in which there just was no development experience listed. And this isn't like what I was hiring for. I was really hiring for with the baseline given, just start the job right off the bat, not having to teach them JavaScript, HTML, or CSS. This wasn't that kind of position. This was a little bit beyond that. So I needed applicants who had experience. And then, of course, you need to ask the right questions during the interview. And I also do code walkthroughs. I don't believe in code tests. I believe in code walkthroughs. And I'll explain what that means in a moment. So in the job description, I explain who we are, that we strive to promote the ever-moving forward best practices in usability, accessibility, security, testing, documentation, and deployment to prepare our student developers for internships and jobs within the industry. So I start out right there, who we are, what we expect, and what this is going to give the students. I also put in there, and I mentioned this quite a bit in my documentation, whether it's the development guidelines, whether it's the job description, whether it's the levels of promotion, I put it right in there. Usability, accessibility, security, testing, documentation, and deployment. Those things are often left to last. I want to put those up first and foremost because those, to me, they're very important. They shouldn't be left to last. And anybody who's getting into this position should know that this is what they're going to get out of it. That this isn't just going to be just write some script, just write some codes and get it working. This is the entire package. This is the entire process that they're going to be a part of, and that it's going to be important that they want to be a part of it. And I also want to make sure that they have the expectation that this is going to be hard work and that it's going to, push them towards internships and jobs within the industry. And then I also give a little bit about who we seek in the job description. Of course, punctual, self-driven, and reliable. We definitely want that. I request 5 to 10 hours per week. I don't give them more. We can give up to 20 hours per week to students, but right off the bat, once they're hired, I pretty much stick around 8 hours a week because I don't want them doing 20 hours in an entry-level position where they don't have the structure yet. I want to get them familiar with the structure and then to get familiar with the platforms before they're doing those 6-hour days or whatever in which that they're like working. I wouldn't say nonstop, of course. They have breaks, but where they're dedicating a lot of time during the day for these projects. So I start them off at about 8 hours a week. And I do say that the ideal candidate possesses experience with CSS, HTML, JavaScript, and PHP, as well as Node. Node, PHP aren't required, but typically these are things that students are able to get experience with either in class or maybe some side work or anything like that, or even personally. So if they have some experience, that's great. They don't need to be experts. I also want to make sure that they have an interest in learning and implementing accessibility and usability standards, as well as automation of code testing and deployment and cloud development in AWS. Maybe they're a candidate who already has some of this experience, so that's great because then they can bring that to the position. But I also, again, want to reiterate that these are important things that we need to be doing in order to make this a full experience for the students. So then who should apply? Well, applicants, and this is the base. This is what I'm, constantly bringing up. They must have a firm knowledge of basic and advanced HTML, CSS, JavaScript, and programming fundamentals. I don't care if they're coming in knowing PHP or Node or Python. I don't really care about that. I want to make sure that they know HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. Those are just, basically freebies. Anybody's able to sit down on a computer and write JavaScript, CSS, HTML, and get that to work basically on your computer. It's pretty simple. Anybody can do that. So I want to make sure that they're able to read code, that they're able to work with these things. If they don't have a good understanding of JavaScript, but yet they've been doing a whole bunch of stuff in React, then there's a problem there, because if they don't have the core fundamentals of understanding how JavaScript works, and yet they're writing React code, I'd love to see the React code, because I don't understand how it's not a two-way street. It has to be a two-way street, but we're starting with JavaScript. I also believe that applicants must be able to demonstrate their curiosity and desire to research, learn, and apply new tools and skills, and that they also must be able to act critically and problem solve. Problem solving is key. If they're coming to me all the time asking a question that they should be able to figure out themselves, then that's a burden, and that's just not going to work. So I want to make sure that they're able to problem solve. And there's going to be questions within the interview that I'm going to ask to kind of see how they are able to problem solve. And then, of course, in the job description, I go over what they'll learn. Again, this is about them learning as well as me learning. And of course, I mentioned that it's an exciting opportunity that it will provide on-the-job training. And I really do believe, and given the track record of the students that I've gone through, they really are able to use skills and identify them and communicate those in their job interviews as they go out for the jobs after college. It's come up time and time again from the students who graduate that they've learned a lot, that they've been able to really communicate during a job interview what they've learned, and able to go further than some of the other candidates and land those high-profile jobs. So I want to make sure that they know that they will be working with different frameworks, that they have the opportunity to work with back-end programming language as well as cloud architecture. So when it comes to interview questions, there's 4 or 5 interview questions that I ask, and they're behavioral based. And what I want to know for the most part is how the student reacts to certain situations, because that's very important in a development environment. Being able to troubleshoot, being able to make a mistake and recover from it, able to collaborate, able to juggle multiple timelines. So one thing that I want to know is, how have they extended their knowledge or learned new development methods in the past? There's a lot of research in this job. There's a lot of learning, self-paced, that they're going to have to do in order to complete a project. So I want to know, how is it that they learn? I also want them to tell me about a time that they had to juggle with timelines, code, documentation, communications, and sharing of ideas among a team. How did they manage it all? What worked? What didn't? I want to see how they turn a negative into a positive, especially with this. I want to show that they communicated with their supervisor. I want to see that they communicated with their team, that they were able to identify an issue and then correct it, or at least reflect upon the project and then figure out what it is that can be done in the future so that something like that doesn't happen again, or that there's a quicker recovery time. Also, I want to know how they deal with feedback and criticism. Now, I'm talking about constructive criticism, of course. So I typically ask, how do you incorporate feedback into your designs? Also, describe a time you received feedback you disagreed with or criticism, and how did you handle it? Again, it's okay to disagree. It's okay to receive feedback that you don't agree with. And I mean, I've done this myself, where I've received feedback, I don't agree with it, I go back to my desk, I ponder a little bit, I think about it, I reflect, and then I either figure out, you know, what merits does the feedback have? Is there any evidence to the contrary? Or is there any evidence that supports the feedback that I received? And maybe, you know, I need to evaluate that and bring that in as well. And there's typically a change in terms of my own thinking. And a lot of students have been able to demonstrate that while talking about those interview questions. I can't tell you the number of times a student, after I've asked this question, they've gone through the process of explaining that they've received something that they didn't agree with. They went back, they researched it, they figured it out, what side does the evidence support, and they came back with a compromise, with, you know, new information, and they were able to go from there. So again, that's just key. Also, I want to make sure that the students are able to make mistakes and learn from them and not let it be like a showstopper, because mistakes will be made. So I want to ask, you know, since this job involves detailed work, on occasion mistakes may be made. Give an example of how you have dealt in the past with a mistake you made on the job. I actually did have a student once who came in, I asked this question, their interview was going great, but I got to this question, they kind of put their head down, well, not on the table, but they, you know, kind of looked down in the lap, and they expressed the concern that they'd never made a mistake and they wouldn't know what to do if they did make a mistake. I definitely don't want to hear something like that. I want students to know that it's okay to make mistakes, but it's how they recover from that. How do they move on from that? What do they do to fix the mistake, learn from the mistake, and make sure that it doesn't happen again, or that it can be easily fixed in the future? What is their communication style? Do they cover it up? I don't think I'd ever have a student who said that I didn't tell anybody or that I lied about it. I don't think anybody would say that in an interview. If they do, of course, that's a huge red flag. But typically what they do is they talk it over with their supervisor and they figure out how it is that they're able to fix it. A lot of times they'll like do a little bit of investigative work in terms of how did the mistake happen, what are the possible solutions for it, and then approach the supervisor. I mean, just depending upon what kind of issues that mistake is presenting, really depends on how they're going to follow through and correct it. After a few questions, then we go through the code walkthroughs. Here's an example of the pseudocode that I use for one of the code walkthroughs. I also do another code walkthrough in which it's JavaScript, one where it's HTML and CSS, and then another one where it's just like small little statements, you know, setting of variables, a few PHP functions or JavaScript functions, you know, then just have them explain what it's doing. This example here is pseudocode, and there, as you look at it, if you're familiar with programming language, for loops, inverting of arrays, and you know, off by one errors, you're going to pick up different things here. First and foremost, I want to make sure that as the students look at this code, that they're able to pick out the variables. Some of them are able to like figure out that the variable b is being set to an empty array. Some are able to figure that out. Again, this is pseudocode, so that could really mean lots of different things depending upon the language. But if you're, you know, doing JavaScript, then hopefully this is something that you can pick up on. So first and foremost, variables and functions that they can pick up on the setters at the very beginning. Hopefully they can pick up on the for loop, and hopefully they can pick up in terms of that n is the length of the array A. Hopefully they can pick that out. And that not only is it the length, but it's also the length minus 1. And then, of course, you know, we got the for loop. And then the end, that is an evaluation. Well, a basic programmer will be able to come here, identify the variables, identify the for loop, maybe, you know, figure out the index of the for loop, and then maybe not quite, probably just end up guessing as to whether length of A is equal to length of B. Somebody with more advanced knowledge will be able to come in here, of course, identify all the same things that the beginner student did, but then maybe even like walk through the calculations of the loop. And so then I'm looking for that. And they may or may not get the last question about the value of z. That's okay. I'm not looking for that. I'm looking for other elements. But an expert or a really advanced student might come in here and get the whole thing right, including being able to walk through, identify that the arrays are not going to be equal, and that and even identify why they're not going to be equal. That's the other thing. Like maybe they'll like figure out, well, no, they're not going to be equal, but maybe they won't be able to explain why. So I really like these code walkthroughs. If a student really gets stuck, I don't have a problem giving them a hint during this, because I want to see how they progress through this. So if I can give them a hint that gets them unstuck and then gets them, throughout the rest of the code, great. That's one thing that I like about walkthroughs rather than tests. With tests, you just set them down and you expect them to do a test, no help, no further information, and then if they get stuck, they're done. If they get very, very nervous, they're done. This here, I'm able to walk them through. I'm able to give them a hint. I'm able to if the interview hasn't been going well to begin with, there's just no point in just having them sit here and sweat it out. I give them a few hints, try to get them to move on, and if I need to end the code walkthrough early, I do. It's as simple as that. Providing structure. You need to set expectations. When you onboard, you need to instill structure, confidence, and independence from day one. You need to establish expectations for communication, as well as work hours and schedules. You need to let them know that there's a safe working environment, as well as promoting lifelong skills. So I want to make sure that I empower and provide leadership opportunities for the students, as well as train, mentor, and advance. So in terms of expectations, with communication and work hours, I want to make sure that they're checking in with me quite often, that I'm always available via, we use Microsoft Teams, but if you use Slack, you can certainly use Slack or some other chat interface. We typically do a lot of Teams chat, so one-on-one chat, group chat, video chat, and screen sharing as we communicate throughout the day. And I always have them check in and check out. So that way when they check in for the day, I know that they're available. And if there's any questions that I have, I can then know that they're in the office and I can send them a message and follow up. And then when they check out, I know that they're done for the day and I'm not going to be communicating with them. I only contact them after hours via email for HR or massive scheduling things. I typically try to do all work via Teams during the work hours. We keep a simple task board with comments for status updates. So it's very simple. It's not heavy like Jira or anything like that. Just what's the title of the project, a short description of the project, who it's assigned to, and then a section for comments. So at the end of the day, they can say what they worked on and what they expect to do when they come in next. Maybe they're going to write the testing, the unit testing for a certain function or something like that next time they're in, or they finished that and now they're going to do something else. And I monitor that. I receive notifications when they add comments. I can then add comments too. So if they say, yeah, I'm having a problem with XYZ, I can, if I know a quick response, I can then comment back and say, well, why don't you try this and maybe check out, this article or this might help you. So then I can also comment back, and it kind of gets rid of the whole real-time expectation that they have to be available and that they have to respond right away, because typically it's done at the end of the day. Also, it helps me keep track as to where they are on the project, and that way I can then quickly refer to it if I need to talk to my supervisors about, if they ask, where's this project, stuff like that. I have updates that way. But then that doesn't mean that the student is alleviated from giving me status updates, in person or via Teams chat. And if I notice that there's a milestone that they hit, Next time that they're in, I'll just send them a chat message saying, hey, can we meet later on today during your shift so you can give me a walkthrough, a code walkthrough. And as I mentioned, schedule changes and school life conflicts, I make sure that they communicate those to me. I know that these aren't like, technical development things, but establishing expectations at the very onset as to how it is that you're supposed to communicate, what happens when school or life gets in the way of work, just letting them know what the expectations are in terms of communication, flexibility, rearranging schedule. Maybe if they're having a personal situation that they need to scale back their hours, that it's okay, just communicate it with me. Don't drop off the face of the earth. As long as you're communicating with me, it's okay. Just, keep me in the loop. And as for work hours, as I said, I start them off at 8, and then as they advance, I let them, have more. It's not a desk job, like a service desk, so I'm able to be flexible with their hours so they can, like, meet with the group and then, like, exchange hours and move around a little bit. I typically give them midterms, finals, and spring break off. I know as developers we like to be workaholics a lot, but I try to, like, incorporate breaks. I try to make them take some time off. I also encourage offsite internships during the summertime. It gives me a break as well as it gives them the opportunity to go out into, I almost want to say the real world, into, a different environment, learn from them, come back and spread some of that knowledge with us. And then of course I want to make sure that they have a safe working environment. That's just, key. As a student, I knew that there were a few times where, especially when I was on the call desk, I'd get phone calls from irate people, something wasn't working, and I'd have to hand it off to my supervisor because they just were not being nice to me. And of course, anybody who's worked in technology, we all know, there's backlash, whether it be on social media. Maybe you launched a project and you had this big old hoopla about, hey, check out our new job board, check out our new library, checkout process or whatnot. And then there's backlash, social media backlash. But I always make sure that the students know, just let it roll off. Don't, there's a ton more people who enjoyed this. This is just a small thing. We did our research. We did user testing. We did all we could. And if this is a valid complaint, we'll work with it. But more often than not, it's not a valid complaint. But, we can just move on. Don't take it personally. And then, of course, there's technology backlash internally sometimes. There's curmudgeons that, that nothing is ever going to be okay with. And I also want to make sure that they have physical safety. So we operate in a large library. So there's 6 floors, and I don't require the students to be in the office. They can work anywhere within the library. So like take up a cozy study space or something like that. And if it's like an empty area where there's no other students, there's nobody else, and there's somebody there that's kind of staring at them or giving them, an uncomfortable vibe, I just explain, just leave the area. If you can't leave the area, what you should do, if you have your laptop open, let me know, via Teams, and I can come up and I can check it out. Or, if you're able to leave, where to go. Maybe I'm not in my office, so you show up and my door's locked and there's nobody there. Well, that's not going to help. So I just say, if you need to leave an uncomfortable situation, go straight down to the circulation desk. It's a public area. There's somebody that's going to be there, and it's also somebody who's going to be able to help take care of the situation. If they need to contact public safety, if they need to send somebody up there, that kind of thing. And then, of course, harassment is just not acceptable. So if they're receiving any harassment from any staff member or any, whether it be within the department or external of the department or any other student, it's not acceptable. Come to me. If they don't feel comfortable coming to me, I give them a contact outside of my supervisory hierarchy. That way they don't feel like if they go to my supervisor, that something might not happen. That they might not take it seriously, that I give them a contact information of somebody outside my supervisory hierarchy. That way they have more of a safe space to go to. And then of course, I myself, be professional and keep cool. And then make sure staff is aware. Make sure that you don't have staff members who are going to be arguing with your students. Make sure that they are aware that if they have a problem, to come to you and not put it on the student. And then promoting lifelong skills. So I always want to make sure that I'm empowering and providing leadership opportunities for the students by establishing guardrails, allowing fresh, innovative ideas, and letting the students lead client projects. So if a project comes in from another staff member or another part of the organization, that they're the ones who are able to lead that. As long as, like, I'm not going to throw them, on this project that they have no experience about. But if it's creating a component for the website that they're more than capable of doing, let them lead that project. CC me if there's no response from the client. So if they're working with somebody and they're trying to get information and they're going a week without receiving information, I have them CC me on that, and lo and behold, typically within that day, the other staff member will get back to them once they see my name onto it. I don't need to step in, just my name being there is enough to invoke a response. I also periodically check in with a student to make sure that their confidence doesn't erode. I make sure that I keep the lines of communication open. And there's always training, mentoring, and advancing students. Making sure that they are trained in accessibility. Make sure that they're trained in diversity, equity, and inclusion. Make sure that they're trained in the university branding. What color purple are we using? There's a specific hex color for that. Making sure that they are able to research and implement projects. So making sure that they can have opportunities to do research. Providing a sandbox for learning experiments and proof of concepts. This is great for establishing guardrails, a place where they can go develop work and learn without impacting production environments. And recommending a video article or a free conference or webinar. I try to send out videos or articles for concepts maybe related to a project that they're working on, maybe not related to a project that they're working on, but something that is helpful to them. Competencies for advancement. So you need to develop a clear sense of progression. So at the very start, I state that understanding of vanilla JavaScript is core to understanding and using JavaScript frameworks correctly. I start them working with vanilla JavaScript, not with frameworks, not with jQuery, not with Angular or anything like that. They're using pure JavaScript to do something pretty much on the static, in our static repository that is then used amongst multiple websites. And I found out, and students have expressed, that after they've done a lot of work with pure JavaScript and understanding that, it does help them when they move to other frameworks. So I've had students be appreciative of that, especially the students who have learned React first, and now I'm making them go back and learn pure JavaScript. They have a better appreciation, and they've expressed that they've had a better appreciation of the framework that they're working with, and they can apply it to other frameworks as well. And then I use simple environments for training. Again, JavaScript, CSS, HTML. It's as simple as it can get. I reveal complexities such as testing and deployment during code walkthroughs and independent research. When I sit them down for a project, they don't need to know about testing right away. They don't need to know about deployment right away. I let them get through the project, and they say, okay, now let's incorporate testing. Then they incorporate testing. They spend a week or two doing testing. And I say, okay, now we're ready to deploy this. So then I go over, or I give them information about how the deployment mechanism works, and then they can start working on that, and they have a better understanding. And the thing about testing and deployment, that's replicable about pretty much with any project that they're doing. So, and of course, if you start them at the very top, they have nowhere to go. So always start them in very basic principles, and they can work their way up. So here's some examples for levels of advancement. So at a level 1, where I start them, when I hire them, and then by the end of their first semester, I expect that students should be able to write accessible, secure, maintainable, and efficient, as well as well-documented code ready to be integrated and deployed in a CI/CD pipeline. Talk about scoping it down, but yet giving them room to grow within that semester. So I'm not keeping them at just JavaScript, for a long time. I'm actually giving them something to look forward to advance, to learn by the end of the semester that is obtainable just by going through and making those building blocks. At level 2, I expect them to be able to onboard new students. So that's a big lift off my plate if I can have these students understand the development environment and help other students set it up, as well as take care of documentation. That's a big thing when I have them, when I hand over the documentation. I say, hey, use this documentation to set up your work environment. And if there's any inaccuracies, if anything changed, fix it. So I give them control over the documentation as well. They can also create documentation from scratch, as well as maintain old documentation. And they should be able to not only write clean, efficient code, but develop novel solutions for contributing to improved code bases and processes, as well as understand more advanced JavaScript concepts such as asynchronous programming, templates, and objects. And then when I get to development level 3 and 4, I'm much more flexible. After like 2 semesters of doing front-end work, if the student is interested in back-end as well as cloud, I can then switch them to that. But we do a lot of node development, so therefore anything that they learned with JavaScript, any of those fundamentals, they have a good core understanding to then start moving to the back end. In the back end, that's really where you want to make sure things are not going to fail. So that's where, understanding good development practices, good testing, good content integration and delivery pipelines, it's very key. So everything that they learned up to that gets them ready to start doing back-end work. So I have a list of 6 items here in terms of being able to set up a development environment, ability to work autonomously, being able to create accessible content, being able to demonstrate the ability to apply best practices for creating accessible web components, able to use basic JavaScript and security principles, and demonstrating and understanding writing and able to demonstrate an understanding of writing test code. Of all these things, I don't have a lot of documentation for, but I also don't need to train the students on. These are things that I can say, hey, go out and do research on this. Figure out how to complete these things. These are the 6 things you need to do by the end of the semester in order to successfully get a pay raise and bump up to the next level. So I have this documented, these 6 things. I have it laid out. The student can then self-progress through that as they're doing a project. And quite honestly, on their first or second project, they should have a lot of these steps checked off. Then they can go through it again and learn more about it and get better at it. So that way, by the end of the semester, they've already done this like 2 or 3 times, and they're ready for the next level. And I don't even need to I supervise, but I don't need to provide the training for this. They can do this on their own. It's self-paced. Development guidelines. So this is where making that list as to the basic stuff that they need to know is very, very helpful. Because when I get to the development guidelines, I write down every language, technology acronym, and tool that should be used or considered for projects. It's a great inventory for me. It's a great inventory for my supervisors, as well as the students. That way we have a list of technology, of languages that we are currently using. And this also helps prevent digital debt. If you look at this list and you see that you're using 6 different frameworks, all different versions, you can figure out, okay, you know what, we need to get a project together that consolidates this. Maybe we do need to use Vue for this. Maybe we do need to use React for this and Angular for this. But we're using 3 different versions of Vue. We're using an outdated version of Angular. How is it that we can consolidate and bring this together and have a student perform that. That way, when new students come on board, we have a technology stack that is maintainable. It's laid out, it's maintainable, and it can be documented a lot easier. And I have the students help develop the guidelines. Guidelines need to, of course, progress as technology progresses. So I got this idea from the book Responsible JavaScript, and in the book they have a ally example in which they list that deliberate choices in terms of what they use are intended to balance accessibility and interoperability, ease of setup, approachability for beginners, cross-operating system and browser support, local cloud and end-user performance, as well as I added a university-wide staffing experience. So that's why I come up with the list, and that is why I say, okay, we're going to be using JSON, CSS, HTML, JavaScript, and Vue in these aspects. We're not going to be coding in Rust on the back end. We're not going to be, bringing in additional frameworks, for these projects. We're going to be sticking to this core set because this is still a large set. I've listed 3 frameworks here as well as jQuery and Bootstrap. You shouldn't have to go too far away from that. You should be able to do this. These are approachable languages. It's not too wide. It's not too broad. It's maintainable. We can have staff members assist because there's knowledge on campus that can work with this. So as great as it is that you learned, this unique flavor of Bootstrap, or you really want to get into Rust programming, we just don't have that here. You need to work within the frameworks that we have here available for us, that we have experience with, that we're able to maintain, because we can't maintain, 100 different things. We need to really stick to the core. We also need to grow eventually, but we're not going to be growing, by adding 3 things every semester. It needs to be a methodical approach in terms of like what technology we're going to add. And we want to make sure that we're sticking to this bulleted list whenever we consider new technology, because we just can't, maintain it. Learning opportunities. So I mentioned this before: train, mentor, advance, and repeat. This is very, very key in terms of like making sure that you maintain accessibility, maintaining diversity, equity, and inclusion, maintaining branding, make sure that they're researching and implementing projects, that you're providing a sandbox for learning and experiments, as well as proof of concepts, recommending a video, article, or conference or webinar, occasionally that they can watch and learn on. And I haven't done this yet, but it would be a good idea to job shadow or bring in an expert. So, have a partnership with somebody out there in the industry, in that the student, that they can come in, talk to the students about, their daily work, or even have the student go and job shadow. So in terms of status updates and code reviews, again, these are very, very important. You don't want to fall off the face of the earth. You don't want the student to fall off the face of the earth, and you don't want to fall off the face of the earth. But yet you also don't want to have, constant contact all the time. But you want to keep the communication channels open. You want to keep the communication channels flowing. One of the things, especially with remote work, especially if you don't have an office right next to the student, which I did not, the student was on a different floor of the library. So our one-on-one connections was very, in person, few and far between. I think I probably only saw my students in person 2 or 3 times a semester. It really wasn't that much. So just making sure that you have that contact with them. When they check in, check in with them. Small talk's okay. Check in with them to see, each milestone. Do code walkthroughs. I was checking in and having them do a code walkthrough maybe every other week whenever they hit a milestone. I would meet via Zoom or Microsoft Teams with them to screen share. Those were wonderful tools. It was a lot easier to screen share via Zoom and Microsoft Teams than it was, doing it in person. So I also let the student lead. So when I noticed that they had a milestone, I say, hey, let's meet this afternoon during your shift, and you can walk me through your code. So then we would meet. They'd walk me through the code. I'd ask a few questions, but I would let them lead. I wouldn't try to like hijack it or anything like that. I would let them lead, them walk through. If I had any questions, any major questions, I'd keep those till last. But if I got lost or a little confused, or I saw something like very glaring that I knew I'd probably forget later on, I'd bring it up. But I try to handle a lot of questions towards last. This also gave the students a chance to present or work through an issue. So if they were teaching me something, they could teach me how they were going about it. They could present their research. If they were having an issue, we could then walk through together their code and kind of figure out how to fix the issue. And then once a student is done doing the code walkthrough, then it was my chance to do a code walkthrough. They wouldn't have to take notes. They could just sit back and just take it in, just kind of like osmosis, in which they just weren't required to understand exactly what it was, but I'd still like present something that they'd be able to grasp a few things about. Maybe I'd show them the back-end project I was working on. They knew JavaScript, so they'd know a little bit about what I was doing with Node. So it wasn't like completely incomprehensible to them, but they wouldn't be expected that, okay, this is your next project. Nothing like that. Maybe I would show them how the development pipeline works, how when they check in their code into the repository, how it automatically kicks off a process that then compiles it and puts it onto the static site. And doing the code walkthroughs and the video meetings is just a chance for us both to learn off of each other. So I have several resources available for this presentation at chadclook.net/GusDay-2023. There you can download this presentation. You can download the development guide that I created as an example. You can also download or look at other training resources that I've made available as well. So thank you for watching, and I hope you learned and received a lot of information that you can use to go back and help with your development efforts as you lead and be led by your student employees. Thank you.